Grime's humble beginnings as a DIY genre remains intrinsic to its identity today, 20 years later. But how was a simple PS1 game so pivotal to the early movement? And how did it help bypass the gatekeepers of the music industry at the time? Grime began in the early 2000s, when garage artists such as DJ Target and Wiley decided that the dance genre did not reflect the realities of London life. After being blacklisted from garage raves for spitting hard lyrics, Wiley went on the search for a new sound. This new sound he found was cold and straight to the point, with gliding square waves and heavy kicks. A new style of MC was born, more greatly inspired by their dancehall roots, where they spat bars rather than cartoony isms. Before the genre landed the name grime because it sounded dirty, the genre was called Eskibeat, coined and pioneered by Wiley. It was also called sublo, two-step and urban.
Certain producers came in with their own names, so Wiley wanted his thing to be called Eskibeat. Johnny Cash wanted his thing to be called sublo. Someone wanted 8-bar. That problem with all the names coming forward was they only worked with that person or that sound. It just happened naturally that we ended up going from calling it grimy garage to grime.
The journalists started calling it grime, and we were like, this is not grime. I don't want to be called grime. Who are you talking about?
We were offended. We were like, what are they trying to say? Like, what do you mean grime? But after a while, we was like, you know what, it is a bit grimy. Like, we get where they're coming from, and like, I guess it kind of signifies the streets thing, and so we just ran with it.
Now, Wiley pioneered Eskibeat. The genre began and grew from there, but North, South and West London put their own identity on it too. In North, we had crews such as Bloodline, Meridian and Boy Better Know, with the likes of Prez T, Big H, Jammer, JME, Frisco and Skepta. Whilst in the East, we had Wiley, Kano, Manga, D-Double and Dizzy Rascal. Crazy Titch ran south whilst Flirted D flew the flag for West. Early grime sounds, when it used to be called Eskibeat, came from equipment such as a Korg Triton or digital audio workstations such as Fruity Loops. That's why grime is 140 BPM, because Fruity Loops' default BPM was 140. And that gliding synth sounds, well, that's a preset called Gliding Square on the Korg Triton. They also sampled video games and movies for these original sounds. And we can't forget Street Fighter, which provided so many samples and is so revered in the scene that D-Dubs made Street Fighter rhythm. But one piece of equipment is almost always forgotten about in grime's history. Not only was the PS1 a huge development in personal computing, it became more than just a games console. The PS1 was a top competitor against Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn. However, it shook the world for two reasons. The first was it introduced 3D graphics and far larger storage facilities to the gaming industry. And secondly, it was underestimated, similarly to grime.
How do you know PlayStation is not a normal game system? It carries these telltale signs. Scientists say its effects are mind-boggling. Users lose all sense of reality and enter another world.
And you know what? The PS1 was sick. I'd rinse out Lara Croft and Need for Speed and Street Fighter. But there's one often forgotten about game that changed the landscapes for emerging electronic music genres. It was the sequel to music for the Sony PlayStation, Music 2000. Music 2000 was released in 1999, a year after the first game, and it revolutionized production forever. Not because it had an amazing wavetable synth or a simpler, but because it made a music studio accessible to regular people. It's actually where some of the early sounds and bones of grime was created, and the ability to layer tracks, thick and heavy drum beats, and even sample created the blueprint to how grime producers made music.
PlayStations, we set 17-year-old producer Benga a challenge. Make us an 8-bar tune in your bedroom using nothing but a PS1 and a £10 CD called Music 2000.
Alright, this is Benga, and I'm showing people how to make a tune on Music 2000 for the PlayStation. And you get a bass line like this. Let's make another bass line for your second part of your 8-bar. You've got 2 bass lines. Switch.
Although the game is forgotten about, it won awards for the most innovative game in 1999, and Jester Interactive Music TM range has sold more copies than any other video game music sequencer worldwide. By today's standard though, it's horrible to use. It's fiddly, unresponsive. I hate the MIDI drawing function, and the sampler is horrendous to use. However, it was an invaluable and, more importantly, a low-cost tool for producers at the time. Preloaded with aiming breaks, rolling acid house basses and a sampler, anyone in the comfort of their own home can become a musician. I mean, like, literally anyone. And that's perfect for an emerging underground genre. JME in fact recalls using Music 2000, which inspired the MC early on to begin producing. But it wasn't just a big deal for grime, it was utilised by a small number of jungle producers too. The implementation meant that the industry that was previously gatekept by producers and DJs with record label deals and financial backings, who were the only ones who could afford the DAWs, computers and samplers, no longer held a monopoly over the urban music industry. Now, before, like, studio time was expensive and reserved for big money or big names. This game, however, opened the floodgates for underground producers, and people began experimenting with the limitations of Music 2000. Whilst it didn't exactly create any genres, the game did inspire a new way of working. And once Fruity Loops became readily available, it was a simple transition over. The range was discontinued in 2003 with Music 3000, but small pockets of experimental musicians still toy with the games today. So yeah, that's the story of Music 2000 and Grime. A game that came out the same year I was born, yet returning to it, I feel like I'm returning to my roots. You know, screw all the fancy plugins and DAWs. Bun Ableton that cost £500. For £6 I bought Music 2000 in 2020. And in my opinion, if you can make a sick tune on something as simple and shit as Music 2000s, then you're a talented producer.